Hi, this is Mike with episode 47 of Getting Everyone Moving, brought to you by Palms and Pines Parasports. Today we have Coach Jim Glatch from Edinboro University. Hey, Jim.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well,
Good. So let's get right into it here. How did you get involved in the world of wheelchair basketball and adaptive sports?
I started in adapted sports back in 1984. I was working as a group home person and a mental health counselor. In my role as a group home person, I had residents that went to Special Olympics practice once a week. Uh, Prior to that, I had helped with youth sports. Just after graduating from college, I would work with little league programs and stuff like that. So I'd already started coaching. When I walked into the first Special Olympics practice that I saw was a disaster. People were just throwing balls everywhere. The nets weren't up properly, and I just went over to whoever was in charge and said, "Hey, can I organize at least half of these kids and let's see what we can do with them." That's how it started. From there, I continued to volunteer as a coach for several sports in Pennsylvania. And about 5 years after I started doing that, I was asked by the state Special Olympics organization to apply for a job, and they hired me. And what I've always said about that job was it was like getting a master's and a PhD in sports admin, because what you do is you learn every aspect of how to run an organization. And it was awesome. So my job went from coaching to running multiple sport events to teaching county programs how to fundraise, how to set up administrations so that they could get new athletes and train them properly. And so it was really just 6 years of a lot of hard work. In my last position, I was director of sports management, which was basically the athletic director and the person who taught all the sports coaches and the sports liaisons how to train. And then I continued to run all the Western events and the state event for Winter Games. So that's how I got started. When Edinboro University put their position in the paper and I applied, I thought, wow, this would be great. I can get away from the administrative side and get back to being with athletes. And while my background was in Special Olympics and not in physically disabled, I thought, well, it's all adapted sports, and I know that I can adapt anything if I put my mind to it. I know I can coach, and I want to get back to coaching. So that's how it happened. That was 1995. And then the first summer, the NWBA, along with the PVA, used to run adult camps once a year. And so I applied to go to the camp. I put myself in a chair. Back in those days, we had a lot of old chairs in the back room that no one would ever use, even for an everyday anymore. There was no fifth or sixth wheel on the back. It was just, and I had to keep the wheels out. It was a lot of fun. So I went to this camp and I stayed in the chair the whole week. It was 90 degrees the whole time. It was at Ball State in Indiana, which is, I wouldn't think normally a really hot place, but that week the humidity and the heat, and it was the best lesson of my life. One of my counselors was Trooper Johnson, who's now our women's coach. He was still one of the top players in the world at that time, and he looked at me. He says, "Oh, you're a coach," and he had a lot of fun with me. Him and Mark Shepard, Davis, those three, I remember just abusing me the whole week. It was fun, and it was a great education. I met with they actually had coaches clinics out there as well. So Brad Hedrick, who was then the coach at Illinois, Lou Shaver, who was still the coach at Southwest, Dan Burns, who was going to be the national team coach in a few years after that. They all did sessions on how to set up practices and how to do different things. And so the only time I wasn't in a session was when I was in their sessions, and they were like an hour or two every day. And I spoke to them. I said, listen, we're trying to start a program at Edinboro. They've had one for 10 years, but it's really not well developed. It's a good program for other sports, but the basketball side of things is really a mess. And they said, well, you've never been in the college division. And I said, oh, I didn't know there was one, And so the first year at Edinboro, we didn't get in. We stayed in the local Keystone Conference. And then the next year we got into the college division. We've been there since. So that's kind of the background.
I'm reading Wheels of Courage now, about the evolution of wheelchair basketball. I mean, fascinating. But why why Edinboro University? I mean, why would they start a program in, adaptive sports?
Back in 1979, 1980, state system of higher education in Pennsylvania started to kind of come together. And initially they were all state colleges. They identified Edinboro University as the campus that would have, that it was the most accessible out of the 14, and should have students with disabilities. So initially it was because we had all of these students with disabilities on campus. In 1985, those students got together. Mark Dombrowski, who was the original coordinator of the program, basically put together a program for road racing and track and basketball and rugby, and they played a lot of games on campus against faculty, against fraternities, against sports teams, and they grew from that. By the time Robin Boyd had taken over, they had a couple athletes who were Paralympic level table tennis players. They had hosted the wheelchair games twice. And by the time I got there, we had developed it into a full-fledged athletic type program. That's how.
Are there other sports then that athletes can play then at the collegiate level at Edinboro University?
Not anymore. And it's like everything else with regards to time and funding. So the first few years I was there, the first thing that happened on day one was the chancellor or the vice president called me into his office for a meeting. And I thought, wow, I'm here one day and they're going to fire me. And what he wanted to discuss was adding a recreational component to the program. So it always been athletic. There was, we had over 150 kids on campus at that time in chairs. We had over 400 or 500 kids on campus with disabilities of various types. So he was like, hey, we need to have things for people who are non-athletes. I said, okay. So for the first 3 or 4 years, I tried to coach about 5 different sports, also run a program for recreation on top of that. And my athletes, especially in the basketball side, were getting a little frustrated with, their lack of time with me just to go over things, because by this point, we're in the college division. And part of a coach's job is to spend time with their athletes to make sure they're not only doing well on the court, but also in the classroom or in personal life. And so it became a real issue. And so what I asked for was, and by this time we also had 2 powerlifters that were getting ready for Athens. And so everyone came to me and they said, we should be recognized as an athletic program like every other sport, because at that point we were in campus recreation. So the deal was made with the vice president of student affairs, the director of OSD at the time, the athletic director, and 5 of my student athletes, all who played either basketball or powerlifted, to move me and part of the program to athletics. And then the recreational component, which we called the AIRS program, Adapted Intramural and Recreational Sports, was moved into campus recreation. So we thought, okay, this is really the development it should look like. It should, recreation should be in recreation, athletics should be in athletics. It shouldn't be in our office for students with disabilities. It should, athletics should be in campus rec. So in 2001, that move happened. And when the move happened, they said, when your powerlifters graduate, we just want you to focus on basketball. So I brought basketball and powerlifting over. And financially, it makes sense for a small university. Trying to fund multiple sports at a state university is very, very difficult. And so trying to fund even wheelchair basketball is difficult. We had started to work with our housing department on housing waivers. And so we only had 4 or 5 of those. And so how do you divide those amongst all those sports? And so it ended up working out really well for all of us.
So there's still, only a handful of universities in the United States that are doing collegiate level adaptive sports. And yes, part of it is funding. Okay, I get that. But what else is going on? I mean, why don't we have more collegiate level adaptive sport programs?
Well, funding is one of the biggest things. And what administrators will tell you is lack of interest. Which is really a really easy line to use when you don't want to have to spend money on a program that's needed. What ends up happening is you don't have the support where you need it. So if you put together a student group at, let's say, Southern Cal, and they said, hey, we want to start, and you have 6 young people that want to play wheelchair basketball. The pipeline that they would have to go through is going to be different on each campus. So that's part of the issue. So let's say the pipeline there is they have an office for students with disabilities, but on a college campus, you only have to identify a person to make sure that services are met. Well, if this person has other faculty duties, there may not be the interest to get that motivated. So you need that inside person to move that forward. Let's say you do have that person. Now the next move is, okay, are we going to be housed students with disabilities? Are we going to be housed with campus rec? Most campuses aren't in athletics. So how do we do that? And then where does the funding come from? Where are we going to practice at? Are we going to be allowed on courts? Are we going to, are they going to make sense? And so it all plays into that big question as to why can't we have more teams? But those are the major issues right there. What universities will tell you is they don't have the numbers. That's their favorite quote. Oh, we don't have the numbers. I've spoken, and I'm not going to throw universities under the bus, but there's a few universities on the East Coast that I have tried to work with from Edinboro and just say, hey, listen, I'll come in and I'll show you how to do this. They offer, if you look at their websites, they offer adapted majors, an adapted athletics major, and they talk about having an adapted rec program. So that means they must have students involved. But when you talk to them personally, they become offended that you would even recommend that you would start a program like that, because they don't need it, because we're already offering the major and we have a couple kids involved in the recreation program. So they feel that they're meeting their needs. So, and these are programs where the professors have majored in this area. So it's really a frustrating battle, and it has been for a lot of years. When I came in 95, Temple had just left the division. Wright State was in and out. University of Nebraska main campus was kind of, and so was SIU. So you had Southwest Minnesota, you had Illinois, you had Texas Arlington, and you had Wisconsin Whitewater as your 4 mainstays all through this.
Right.
When you look at those programs that had started before, what happened? Well, at Temple, they hired a new person, and he didn't want to travel. He wanted to stay local. So he kept all the kids that he had with the previous guy, and they just got older. They weren't in college at Temple. They just played for Temple would sponsor a local team. SIU and Nebraska both had graduate assistants running their program. So when they graduated, and SIU pulled this off for years. And then finally it was like, we can't do this anymore. And so the funding there for a person to run that program. And Kathy Hollister, I don't know if she's still there or not, who oversaw the program, wonderful lady. She wanted more, but again, it's upper administration not giving the support that is needed. And then Nebraska just kind of went away. Wright State went away. It was in recreation. And Wright State is an incredibly accessible university. They have tunnels there, so kids don't have to go outside in the wintertime. That's beautiful. Love to have that at Edinboro, So it's those kind of things when it got started. So then trying to build that back up, we've watched programs like Missouri, programs like Alabama, survive because of the upper administration. Missouri's program started because of I don't know if it's a state senator or state representative who had attended Missouri, was a person with disability, and he pushed for that to happen. Alabama, their president who came in had been the president of Texas Arlington when they started their program and was a huge advocate of it. So you can see how those things help. At Auburn, they had a young man who really fought. And now the program is technically under their second coach, and they're thriving. They have, a nice facility and everything like that. So those kind of things are happening. It just takes forever. When Missouri started, I was a first-year coach. Brad, I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name, came to see me from Missouri and said, how did you get this program started? And I started laughing. I said, it was here before I got here. Was not just developed yet. And he took that, and he was like the representative's representative, and he was going to Whitewater, Edinboro, Texas, just to find out how to get this started. So I think Missouri played their first game in 2001. It took 6 years to get that moving forward. They have a great program now, but it took 6 years. So that's where we're at. Now we have Arizona back in the fold. We have Eastern Washington just started their program. They were at Nationals for the first time ever. That's wonderful to see. Nebraska Omaha has a program. And I think that one of the things that could help that process to grow is the junior programs. So when you look at the Nebraska Omaha program, that's an ideal situation. You have a wonderful junior program in Nebraska, and Mike was the guy who ran that, and now he's the head coach at Nebraska Omaha. Well, yes, those are the kind of things. Where at Edinboro, that's where it doesn't make sense still. We don't have a junior program. The closest one is Cleveland and then Philadelphia. But, you know, Illinois makes sense. Whitewater makes sense. They have all those junior programs. So California would make sense, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys have a lot of programs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great kind of history of collegiate level adaptive sports. What are you most proud of, you know, as a coach? And within that, talk a little bit about your coaching philosophy. You know, when I coach, I see the athlete, right? I don't see big deal. He's in he or she's in a chair. So say a few words about all of that.
Well, I think similar in that I coach people. I don't coach the chair. I coach young people, and it's the philosophy is huge in that as a coach, as a person who's competitive, I want to win. So to be able to win, you have to teach properly. You have to teach kids skills that they don't have. We've had some incredible athletes come through who thought they knew everything, and then they realized they couldn't turn their chair properly. So the teaching aspect is a huge part of what I do. As a college coach, though, the big part of it is the academic side of things, making sure that you have the grades, because this is not a life's mission. You can play it forever, and maybe you'll go to Europe and play a little bit. I want you to have a job. So we graduate over 75% of my program in the last 26 years, and almost 90% of those kids have jobs because some of them have realized, oh, coach was right, I should have gone to class and done my work, and have gone back to school afterwards, and now now they're employed. So part of it is the teaching on the court, part of it is teaching in life and saying, hey, we need you to be better than everybody else, because people, unlike me and you, still see the chair. So you have to be prepared. So a lot of my philosophy is around teaching and preparation. When we recruit a kid, we look at kids in different ways, and that's a part of the philosophy too. I want to bring in kids that want to work. Mm-hmm. We're not always going to get, the Steve Serios or the Pat Andersons at Edinboro. I understand that. I had to take that lump many, many years ago and understand that process. That doesn't mean that, player X or player Y doesn't deserve that same amount of energy from me and focus, and that their career couldn't be something special, not just basketball wise, but, personally. And so that's kind of where I've taken my drive. We have done really well as a small college, probably the smallest college in the country, with those type of players. And we have produced some incredible basketball players, but we have produced a lot of incredible adults that have given back to the sport, that have given back to their employer, that have given back to the university, and that I talk to all the time. There's some that I talk to weekly, and that's 26 years of incredible experiences. So that's kind of my philosophy. It's mostly preparation and teaching, but there's a lot of competitiveness in me as well.
Now you've coached at the Paralympic level as well. What was that experience like?
Ooh, that was too fast for it was like a bullet train that went from A to B. Those 4 years were awesome, incredible, and I wish I could have them all back again. But I think, like everything else, was probably the best learning experience. So when I talked about Special Olympics being like a master's and a PhD in administrative work, as much as you think you know about coaching, you better be ready to do some extra homework when you coach at that level. Because one of the first things I said to that team was, you're not a college team. Some of you are professional athletes. You're all professionals in some ways. I'm going to treat you like adults. And that was probably the best thing I could have done, was taking myself aside and saying, these are not Edinboro student athletes. I had coached the U23 team, and they were a lot of student athletes still at Edinboro and other schools. And so I still treated that team more of like a college program where there was, lights out and stuff like that. There was restrictions on what you could and couldn't do. So some of you are 30, 35 years old. I'm not going to tell you that after practice is over for the day, you can't go out with, with one of your teammates. The rules were show up ready to practice and don't be hungover. So those were kind of the only rules I had. So that was a big difference from coaching in a college program. The travel, the people that you meet, the experiences, and seeing all the different countries that we were in. When we look at accessibility and what the ADA has done for us, people should be a little appreciative. It's not to say that we're perfect, because we're far from it. But I remember, being in countries where, they had to bring, they designed a wooden ramp that they flipped onto a bus because the buses weren't accessible. The curb cuts were not something that you would ever want to push up and down on. So, and obviously because we were a national program, we were primarily going to Olympic style cities that were designed for people with disabilities. So it was really accessible, but there were events we went to that were in hotels and stuff. And, they were old and the elevators don't always work and the rooms are not accessible. And so there was some interesting issues that we had along the way. I remember taking a bus trip from Belgium to France, and we had to watch people kind of crawl onto the bus, and that was interesting. I mean, but Belgium, beautiful country. The hotel wasn't really accessible. The restaurant that we ate at next door was okay, but the bathrooms, the guys were all complaining about how the bathrooms were too small. And then we got on this bus to go back to France, and now when we got to France and went to England from there, they had a different bus. Yeah. So I think the more developed the country is, or the more understanding they have of a adapted sports program and people with disabilities in general, I think they're more advanced. Now, I almost got the feeling, and maybe this was just the people I was surrounded by, that some of those countries in Europe are a little more understanding to the needs, and kind of like what you and I talked about earlier, they don't see the wheelchair, they just see a person. And so I think that's maybe one of the differences that I see, from some of the European, not all of them, but some of the European countries, and what we see here in our country every day. I think that if people had the attitude that you and I have, the ADA wouldn't A, be necessary, but B, it would be enforced. And that's something that drives me nuts daily. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. What do you see as the future of wheelchair basketball? Do you see a professional league in the U.S.?
I'd like to say yes. And I hold out hope that will happen. I think it comes down to a few things. One is when you look at some of the European leagues, those countries are bigger than what we imagine they are, yet they are able to identify certain pockets in those countries that they have a team. As with any kind of professional sport, you need some form of sponsorship. And so the level of sponsorship has to be meet the needs of the person. So many of the athletes that play over there, their salaries are okay, but they're not something we're going to live the rest of our lives on.
Yeah.
I think there's some athletes that get paid very well. But I look at a kid like Chase Wolf, who just graduated the year before. He's playing for the Rhinos in Germany, and one of his teammates is Tommie, another former Edinboro player. So they pay for his apartment. He gets a salary once a month for 8 months that he's over there, and they pay for a couple plane tickets. I don't think Chase would mind, but I think he makes about $1,500 a month US. It might be less. That's a pretty good salary for him, but as far as playing professional, but he doesn't have any responsibilities. He just graduated from college, but he was 30 years old. And that's when I start seeing my players come back home is, hey, I've got my college degree. I need to get a job. I'm starting a family. I can't support my family. So I think in this country, to start a program that is totally professional, you have to look at what type of sponsorship are you going to have? Is it going to be tied in with the NBA and the WNBA? Yeah. Because I think that would be the route. Now, how are you going to pay these athletes? Well, if you're being sponsored by, let's say, the New York Knicks, the Dallas Mavericks, two of our best Division I teams. Let's say they sponsored and paid Pat and Steve and Jay and those guys down in Dallas $30,000 a year. Now, I don't know if that's enough to live off in New York and Dallas. I live in Meadville, so it would be plenty to live off of Meadville. But and they gave them housing. Would that be enough? And so it becomes a pretty expensive venture. Then the second part of that is travel, and travel in the U.S. is a lot different than travel in Europe.
Right.
So I think those are some of the pitfalls of trying to start a professional league in the United States. It's not to say it couldn't be done, and it's not to say that I wouldn't like to see it happen. I think some of our athletes would love to be over here instead of Europe. While great experience, I think they would like to be closer home. But I think it comes down to, as with everything, logistics and defining how do you pay these athletes, and where's the sponsorship come from to do that. And I think that's really the difficult aspect of all this. I could honestly see track being more professionalized than wheelchair basketball, just based off of what little I know about able-bodied track and how these athletes go over and they run into meets and they get sponsored and they make money just to show up.
Yeah.
I think that would be easier. Maybe tennis would be easier, but basketball, while it's my first love, I think it would be really, really difficult to start an NBA program in the United States, at least right now.
Okay. How do we create more inclusion in our society?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Again, it's all perception. It's all how people look at other people. It's what we've been watching on the news for the last how many years with everyone. Just looking at, I've never understood why, if I look at you, why I would see you any different than I would see myself. Again, you and I are individuals who probably don't see wheelchair, who probably don't see color of skin, probably don't see gender, probably, we are those kind of people. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't like that. So that's problem one. To take it down a level, like to a college level, because of where I work, or even at a junior level, people look at other laws first. They look at other things first. And where I'm going with this is Title IX. Title IX is an important law, and it does have some protections for people with disabilities in it. But they put that above everything else. So when I have the argument in my athletic director's office, well, I'm the only basketball coach on campus without an assistant coach. Well, and she's a former special ed teacher besides being a former athlete. She looks at me, she goes, I know, I get it. That's not her. That's the funding coming from up top. So if we are going to have total inclusion, we have to do two things. One, we have to identify everybody as being the same. And then the second part is we have to treat everybody the same and follow the laws of the land. And until we start doing those things, we're still going to struggle. And I think, you and I are both old enough to realize that we probably won't see it in our lifetime. My only thing is, I wish and I would hope that those programs like mine that are already on campuses would be more leaders. And I'm not talking the coaches. The coaches are incredible. There's not one of those coaches out there that isn't a leader. It's the people above them, and have them look really hard at what they're doing. Is this a nice thing we're doing for the kids in a wheelchair? Or is this a program that we offer because it's the right thing to do and this is where it belongs? And so those are the things that have to change. And again, unfortunately, I don't think in our lifetime we'll see some. It's incremental. It's incremental, but it's not going to be the changes we're looking for.
Yeah, very true. So we're getting towards the end of our interview. What are some final words that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think anyone who has never seen a wheelchair basketball game needs to come out and watch one. And the beauty of the internet is that, at least at the college level, and I know the NWBA does this to a certain degree, and now I'm finding out some junior programs do this, look for wheelchair basketball and look on Facebook, look on YouTube, look on Twitter. Everybody's starting to broadcast their games. So where in 95, I couldn't watch Trooper Johnson play unless I went to a national tournament. I can watch, teams play. Like I said, I watched earlier the college national tournament from my home in Meadville, Pennsylvania, while it's being played at the University of Alabama. I always encourage campers to do that. But I would also encourage others who've never seen the sport before to go online and find it and just watch a game, watch 2 games. Much like TV with any sport, it doesn't do its justice. So I have friends who go to football games all the time, and I make it a point to get to a couple Steeler games with them every year. And those guys who never go are like, oh, it's just as good on TV. I'm like, no, it's really not. You know, the atmosphere, the energy. I was listening to the announcer for Alabama, and he was talking about this one young man from Texas, Arlington, and he said, we cannot tell you how fast he really is unless you were here watching it. And it was true. And I'm watching the young man, and he's just flying past everybody, and knowing the sport, I'm thinking, this guy's got to be just unbelievable. So the second part of that is getting to a game. And because there's so many teams across the country, it might be a little bit of a drive, but I think I think the last part of it is, and I think you know this from some of the work that I've been doing with the junior division and the college division, is making sure everybody understands where these are at, because I don't know all the junior programs that I've been coaching for 26 years. So us having the opportunity to work together this past year, while it be under strange circumstances, has been incredible. And I think because of that, we'll be able to see more, and these kids will be exposed to more. And I think that's what it's all about. So
thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. This was fun. I appreciate it.